Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you about the books I plan to read in 2020. So all of you should feel free to go ahead and consider this the only TBR you'll see this entire year, most likely. The thing about TBRs, the thing about planning my reading, is that it never works out very well. I find that I'm so much of a mood reader that if I plan and plot too much of my reading, then I end up feeling like a failure because inevitably those are not the books that I feel like reading. So I don't do TBRs on this channel, and I don't have much opportunity to participate in things like readathons, so there's rarely TBRs for those. So yeah, I'm just going to tell you about a few books that I plan to read in 2020. I have 12 months to do it. Surely I will feel like picking these up at some point in the upcoming year, and yeah. If I don't, we're going to forget that this little video ever existed. First isn't just one book, it's actually an entire series, starting with Every Hearted Doorway by Seanan and McGuire. This book is the first in the Wayward Children series. It's critically acclaimed, it's super popular across all of BookTube. Everyone has probably at least heard something about it, but it is a series of fantasy novellas in which Seanan McGuire builds a scenario around the fairy tale stories that we've heard where children cross over to other worlds, and basically this focuses on what happens when they return, or what happens when they're here on Earth and they're missing their fantastical realm. I believe there's 5 books at this point. I believe that I have 4, and so not just one book, a series of books. However, they're all relatively short. They are novellas. And like I said, so many people are very pleased with this book, with this series. And I just found myself collecting them because of that acclaim, and have actually really psyched myself up to wanting to read it. Next is another tricky one, the book Alex by Pierre LeMaitre. So this is a crime thriller about Detective or Commandant Camille Verhoeven, close, Camille Verhoeven. And this book is the second book in a trilogy featuring this detective, written by the French author and then translated. So Alex is by far the most popular, the most talked about, and I believe the most critically acclaimed book in the series. However, this is book 2, and I've sort of promised myself that I wouldn't read book 2 until I read book 1, which is called Irene. Alex is about a girl named Alex who is held in captivity and subjected to some pretty awful things, but is also not maybe 100% a victim. At least that's what the synopsis alludes to. So like I said, lots of people really like this book. That's how I heard about the series, is people elevating this book to heights of popularity on BookTube. But I am determined to read Irene first. The first book is called Irene, second book is called Alex, and third book is called Camille. Whether that poor little third book gets read or not, I'm not sure. It depends on how Irene and Alex go. But on top of the 4 novellas in the Wayward Children series, now there's at least 2 books so that I can read Alex. Next is something maybe a little bit different than anything else on this list. It's Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This is another extremely popular book, both just culturally and on BookTube specifically. It's the story of Jon Krakauer's sort of investigative experience with people who climb Mount Everest and trying to summit Mount Everest. This is maybe maybe his most popular book, but John Krakauer has a whole bunch of books that I would just really love to sit down and binge. Into the Wild is one. Under the Banner of Heaven is another. He inserts himself and dives deep into investigations and research to bring to life, or to create a story out of a real life thing that deserves attention. Like the people who try to summit Everest and lose their lives for that, and everything that entails. I'm particularly drawn to Krakauer because he tends to write nonfiction in a way that my understanding is, I guess. My understanding, since I've never really read any, is that he writes nonfiction in a way that engages primarily fiction readers. His nonfiction stories still contain exciting action elements, drama, etc. So he's like a fiction writer who writes nonfiction. I don't know how else to explain it. That's a really not a great way. Don't explain it like that. But definitely getting this puppy read, if not other John Krakauer books this year. I always tell myself and you guys that I want to read more nonfiction. That is still true. It's just hard. It's just hard, guys, because fiction is my first and truest love. And when you don't have a lot of reading time, I naturally want to pick up what I'm comfortable with, what I know I'm going to enjoy. I spend so much time stressed out that a lot of the nonfiction books I've picked up, I'm afraid will give me more anxiety than I already have, which that's not a good idea. So yeah, but I love survival stories. I love fiction that contains survivalist elements, man versus nature. That's a huge one for me. And so I'm just excited to read this. I don't know what else to say. That's it. I can't really explain my fascination with this next one. It just exists in me. But that is Wanderers by Chuck Wendig. This came out in 2019. It's the story of a large number of people all entering this sleepwalking or trance-like state, and they all begin walking towards something. They can't be disturbed, they can't be awoken, but they're all walking towards something, and nobody knows if it's apocalyptic or if it's good, if it's bad. It's just one of those weird phenomenon that just takes place one day. It's a chunker. It's a big old book. And I've never read Chuck Wendig before. I understand, having heard things, this book is good, but it definitely has its shortcomings. It's pretty long, so, it can be said that it contains some things it doesn't need to contain, etc. And like I said, I can't explain really my fascination with this book other than I'm super fascinated by it. I love that cover. That's awesome. But if I get this read in 2020, it'll probably be the biggest accomplishment, because the number of books that I've read that are this long are truly, I could probably count it on one hand. It's just one of those books that calls to me, that sits on my shelf and is like, you want to read me? Read me now. And finally is a book that I talked about in 2019 repeatedly. That is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This is one of my most anticipated reads. This is something that I kept saying I was going to read, and I didn't read it. And I will read this, if for no other reason than I've already said that I would read it, so it should have been read by now, and I'm uncomfortable with the fact that it isn't. So it's getting done. The Hunting Party is a book about a group of friends who reunite on New Year's in this like hunting. I don't know if it's a cabin or whatever, but it takes place in the Scottish wilderness, and all of these people reunite for one moment in time, and one of them is a murderer, and one of them does end up dead. So it's, you know, an isolated, closed circle mystery, which is just classic and awesome. And I don't know anybody who doesn't really appreciate or enjoy one of those stories from time to time. It's been a long time since I've read one, I think. Probably 10 by Gretchen McNeil, which I read in 2017, or possibly The Last by Hannah Jameson, which I read in 2019. But The Last is kind of tricky. I don't know if I would really call that closed. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. Basically, The Hunting Party is just always, I've always thought that this book would be phenomenal. And like I said, I've told you guys before that I would read it, and I would read it, and it would be read, and it's still not read, and nobody is more upset about that than I. So 2020 is the year that The Hunting Party gets read, hopefully sooner rather than later. So total, that's 9 books, I guess, that I'm committing to reading in the whole year of 2020. That sounds so pitiful, but I mean, if you're a mood reader like me, you definitely understand where I'm coming from. And being a mood reader plus having a lot of time constraints means that the majority of books that I intend to read don't get read. So stay tuned to my channel through the year, and hopefully you will hear my thoughts and opinions on each of those books that I mentioned, or series, what have you, that I mentioned in this video. If you have any questions about the books, let me know down in the comments section below. If you have a preference to what you'd like to see me read first, throw that out there too, because I'm definitely open to suggestion. I can't promise anything, but we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.